the one thing that I learned, and this was the one thing that I know, and I did this about 2.5 years ago, and I made a pact that if I post something, I'm not going to take it off.
Whoa.
Right? And so that's what I do. And so whenever I start to feel that fear, I remember that pact that I made, because I tell myself is that if I post something, there's a meaning and reason behind it, and I will live and die by whatever consequence comes from that.
Sione, I can't get over the fact that, and I was referencing this to you before the podcast started, we're our own teams, we're our own producers, PAs. I mean, it's so interesting if you think about that, because, I don't know, there's something about this media space, and there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that you don't see, but it's kind of created in a way where it would be like the TV producers or the TV presenters, when they're talking to you, it's like they're talking to you, but they're reading. But for us now, it is just us talking, and I think that's interesting when I think about someone like yourself, because I guess you've seen the window into professional sport, into balancing the line of knowing what to say and what not to say based off brand and bigger kind of concepts. When you're in the moment, bro, for like league and stuff, and I'll kind of say hello properly in a second, I mean, are you aware of these things? When you think back to like the professional days where you're representing something that's not you, are you aware that you have to be a different version of yourself to the version that we get to see tonight?
Yeah, you're fully aware. And I remember one of the interviews that I did with one of the papers. I almost, I guess, slipped up in some of the things that I had said, but you're consciously aware of the words that come out of your mouth, especially when you're in front of the media. And so once that's all said and done, then you jump in your car, and that's basically you can start to be yourself, right? But the moment you step out back into the machine of being a professional athlete, you are 100% aware of who you have to be.
It can't be, I mean, do you create a character almost, like a professional actor would channel something? Because I think that would, that must be a tough part of it. Did you ever think consciously that, man, I can't be myself, or is the week's too busy? I guess when you're playing pro, it's just your schedule's booked for you and you just go do things. Is that kind of how it is?
Yeah, it is. But there's also this perception that professional athletes are really busy. They are during the preseason, but what actually happens during the season is your training load halves. So you've actually got a bit more time.
Gotcha.
But in terms of creating a character, I think there's this general character across every single professional athlete, which is just try and be a nice guy, right? Like, which after 10 losses is very hard to do, right? And so after 10, 11 losses, you're out in the public, you're expected to, yep, thank you. But so I think that's the persona that a lot of the professional athletes have to put on, regardless of how well or how bad their performance the team is going at that particular moment in time.
Bro, I can just feel that tension worldwide with who we are versus who we think we should be, and I'm not sure on that, because I think it is good having a standard of who we think we should be, maybe something to aim towards, but you've really got to make sure the bedrock you're doing it for is right, which is why I think it's interesting, even the stuff you're doing on social media right now with kind of current league situations where it's like, man, I don't know, you kind of have this window in, so there's a responsibility to keep the curtain down, I guess, because keep it on the field type stuff. but you're also a human who has their own name attached to their own social media account, and you're trading in yourself now, right? So there is a deep tension there, and I guess I will resist kind of going into exactly, but I know when I saw you posting recently, I wanted to reach out and not to talk about that, because I think that's the instinct. Everyone will be like, let's talk about that. But I'm just interested in the thought process and the pace of the world and all of that stuff. But we did jump into it. Sione Faumuinā, you are joining me on the podcast on Oriana TV. And I think it's cool that the audience watching this is Pacifica. I was saying to you before that this channel is targeted towards Pacific Island people. And I think what's also interesting is that we're like one of the last shows that plays at night. And I think it's cool because, we've had all these insightful kind of Pacifica things from around the islands, and then we show up and we're having this kind of deeper conversation. Can I just ask if like outside the footy stuff, when you were growing up and stuff, what was sport like super important? What else was kind of like inspiring you when you were growing up? Maybe family members, because we just want to get out of putting people in a box, and we do it. We tie you to league, and I really want to work hard to break us out of that, because we're just people. So what was kind of inspiring you when you grew up? Do you think back?
Yeah, I can definitely think back. Sport played a really big part in my life, but that was out of my own decision. It was never forced upon me. I just happened to love it. Me and two friends going down to the horse paddock, playing league in the horse paddock, playing cricket, and then playing basketball. So I just loved playing sport. It just so happened that I had three older uncles who went on and played professional rugby. So by the time I was 10 or 11, I was training with them. And so that's where I started to sort of be in that environment of, you actually have to train hard. And then, it went from being sort of social to just, okay, I'm just going to follow my uncles and see what they do and copy them. And that's where it sort of, I guess I picked up that habit of, because I just love to train from that point onwards. But I never trained to play professionally. I just loved to train.
And I mean, on that point, that's kind of different to the journey of young people today, right? Like you are kind of I don't know, you might have a better insight, but it feels like you're identified at a super young age based off ability and all of these things, and you're kind of put through the factory. And I kind of find it, beautiful, the fact that, there was no pressure and that you had to kind of find your way. And I still think we have to find our way, but it feels like for those players coming through, and potentially you might have seen this with, your colleagues as you were kind of, wrapping up the pro career, that finding your way as an adult is challenging, right? And finding your path. How long did you kind of strategize life after footy?
Look, if I'm being totally honest, I started strategizing probably in my second to last year. Yeah. And what I mean by strategize, I spent $7,500 on a trading platform and made $7. So by that point, I was literally looking at what could be described as get rich quick schemes. Because I did not want to work. And, for me, when it started to, I guess, hammer home that, hey, this is going to end, that's when I started to panic. And then even then, that still wasn't enough for me to put in the work needed to transition successfully. So when I finished, my first job was working in a bottle shop on $19 an hour.
Yeah, look, and I guess there's a lot of resource now for players, right? I know through my work at MIT in Auckland that even the Blues are doing things with their team to make sure that everyone is upskilling. What was the deal when you were playing? Was it just like, were you just a player? Did anyone think of you outside of that context?
No. I was just a player. Back then, there wasn't a big emphasis on life after footy, on another career path, because contrary to what people may think, it really is all about winning. Right? It is. And so I'm not going to say it's almost like you're frowned upon if your time is used elsewhere, but you needed to focus on playing the best that you can, which is training hard, right? And so it wasn't like we turn up and sat down with someone and they'll say, so Sione, did you end up putting in 2 hours of study? That never happened.
That's crack up. I mean, crack up in like a real freaky way, because we know how complicated we are as humans, and maybe we'll go to this break, but we'll come back and let's talk about winning, because I think that's what is the measurement for success? When you were playing professionally, were those things, was the idea of winning set out in goals, or was it like just being the team in the finals?
That's a good question. I guess across my 9-year career, different coaches had different ways. Some had structured out each a 4-game block, so you would plan out every 4 games. Others had the big picture goal at the end. And so, winning ultimately as a professional athlete is whatever number one gets. So in the NRL, it's a premiership. And so, when you're playing in that sports environment, winning is the ultimate goal, especially when you're paid. Right? But when you look at winning, in my opinion, when it comes to business, it depends on your own perception and perspective, because is there actually a measurement or KPI to winning in business? What does that look like? Is it $1 million? Okay, why isn't it 10 million then? Or why isn't it 100 million? So when you can understand the game that you're playing and what winning looks like to you, it really does determine the outcome. So obviously there's a lot of correlation between sport and business, but I think ultimately they both have a different set of rules. Yeah.
What about life for you then, if we talk about being a human, and this is something we can spend a bit of time on. Like, I don't really know what the goal is, because there's many areas where you could look like what winning is. Is it being remembered in a fond way? Is it leaving a lot behind? Is it actually you being more happy than sad because the decisions you make are ones you're proud of? How do you kind of see what would make a successful, or what would make it, how would you define winning just as a person?
I think it really comes down to how you were brought up, your values and your beliefs, because winning to me in life will be totally different to, let's say, you. But if we look at if there was ever a blueprint to winning in life, it would be A's in all your subjects, go to university, graduate, get a high-paying job, get married, settle down, buy your first house, maybe get an investment property, right? And then you retire with a nice little nest egg and spend the rest of it. That would ultimately, most people say, I've won, right? But for someone like me, I'm like, that's losing. But you know what I mean?
But 100%, 100%.
So
that's the complexity of it, eh? Why do we chase that as if that's winning when we know it's losing? Because everyone that has that, they're never happy.
Yeah.
And it's like those things don't really exist, because you can project that they exist, but you just owe a lot of money to someone for your house. And so it feels like almost the opposite. That you talked about, finishing league and not knowing and making decisions rash and quickly, and kind of like leading down a path, but it's almost like you now have an advantage because you saw that. It's like you paid the price for trying something, but you got an awesome insight, like an expensive insight, but an awesome insight. And I guess my question for people is, or even myself, is how do we become comfortable with that? You know, can you ever become comfortable that you just have that there is no easy way? It's just a hard way, eh?
Yep. And I think when it comes to, if we go back to, winning at life, I think it ultimately comes down to you against you. And you get to make the rules, I guess. But the moment you start trying to win at the game of life based on other people's rules, that's where it starts to get a bit dangerous.
Yeah. It's did you have a sense of that, like, and I guess I'll just talk about, Sione, in the professional environment versus, I mean, you're still in the professional environment, but you're your coach, you're your team, and I just get the feeling, what that professional stuff represents for a lot of people is like the cream of the crop, but my thing is at what cost, because you're really being isolated to just be really awesome in very niche areas, eh? And I think for many people there, that inspires them. Yeah. But we put so much emphasis on these people as heroes. Like, you literally are heroes. You put on the uniform. You're the Avengers, if you like. Everyone's got characters, and that's the funny one, and that's the tough one, and that's the emotional one, and all those things. But actually, we're all just people, and we trick ourselves into this kind of idea that I could never be that. But any of us could be anything, and that's I sometimes think, and I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I've been trying to process my grandmother's journey, right, coming from Raro and leaving the island for something, because we look back on it now and think, why'd you leave? It was nice there. You had a system. You had your cultural ways. You came here where it was tough, and you couldn't bring all your kids with you, and you had to fight through all this kind of, whatever people fought through during those, 60s and 70s and stuff. But for some reason they did it, and I think they did it so we could exactly have this chat, and that's a hell of a thought, that that's the price they were willing to give up for winning, was that their family going forward could sit down and, I don't know, man, but I think there's something kind of, if I kind of gently touch on those posts you were making recently, like the bravery that comes with that, and I was thinking about it in terms of a voyage, that they took the voyage like over the seas, and now the burden we have is maybe it's not a physical voyage, but it's a mental voyage, to not be kind of lumped in a box of you're this. So okay, we'll go to a quick break, and then when we come back, maybe I'll ask you a little bit about your Pacific past, and where your family came from, and coming across on their voyage. What's your family story? Where does your family come from, and do you kind of follow that journey?
My father is born in Samoa, in a village called Salemua, and on my father's side, my heritage is Samoan Irish. So I think from the last family reunion, I am the fifth generation of an Irishman from Australia.
Wow.
And so Faumuina is actually a chief name that was gifted to my grandmother, who then gifted it to my grandfather, who then used it as our surname. So our real last name, and this is probably going to sound pretty hilarious, is actually McCarthy. So my grandfather's name is William McCarthy.
Wow, true.
Yeah. Wow. But long story short, he was a very naughty boy in his village, and got disowned, and was not allowed to use the McCarthy name. And on my mother's side, so my grandmother came to Auckland and at the end of late 40s or 1950, and then had my mum and all her siblings in Auckland. So my mum's New Zealand born, and all her brothers and sisters, except for her young 3 brothers. And so, but then Grandma moved back to the islands and raised my mum and her siblings. And so on my grandmother's side, I am a 7th generation Scottish, and I'm a direct descendant of Ned Purcell. So
wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. And who taught you all that stuff? Did you kind of just ask, or does that get passed down?
I asked. I did some research. I asked my sister. I went on a trip to Samoa 2 years ago, and I felt this like disconnect. And then after that trip, I was on this journey to learning more about my ancestry and history, genealogy. And so it was really eye-opening, because I discovered that, you know, I have royal bloodline in Samoa. So from my grandmother's side, which is, I was like, wow. And so, which was pretty cool. And then also learning more about my grandfather's side, it has really sort of shifted me as a person in terms of how I carry myself now.
In what ways, bro? Like, because I guess why I asked that is, you know, I don't know if you feel this about the world, but the world seems to be saying, maybe not consciously but unconsciously, that we're teams, we're part of teams, and you better choose your team, and you better choose the right team. And I guess the tricky bit for me, you know, as you just outlined for us, that we are a lot of things, you know, particularly in New Zealand, where that there is this generation of all of these kind of people descending, and that it's not simple. You know, we all have a little bit of in us, and the bit I'm worried about is it can just become about how we externally look. You know, and I thought we were moving away from that kind of world where we were moving more towards, okay, well, yes, but those are just physical things.
Yeah, what made you think we were moving away from that sort of world?
Yeah, well, maybe it's because I am a product of seeing the best of both. And so part of my journey on the podcast has been trying to explore that, right? Because seeing the best of both hasn't always served me.
Yeah.
Like, it's confusing for me because I don't understand you know, horrific things, for example, that I only saw and was present around harmony. You know, so I've purposefully gone into trying to understand a bit more about, you know, why humans have such a dark capacity for whatever they do, control, greed, you know, all of the things that I try not to spend too much time on, but you have to acknowledge it to be a well-rounded human, right? So I think a lot of the public conversation is about the pain coming back, or the dark coming back to the light, right? And that you see that through, it's a popular narrative in films, and, you know, it's always like you nearly don't make it, but you do. But you kind of hardly ever see the other way around, which is like someone purposefully looking to understand both. And I think it is my duty in some ways to do that, because like the world also needs a lot of love at the moment, you know, and I'm someone who's kind of blessed enough or lucky enough, right, to be the youngest of a big family and get chaperoned through a little bit to offer that. So that is kind of why and I still think it's possible, and I thought we were moving away, and I really did think, like, the public conversation, I thought, was that the idea was, you know, that total control over someone isn't a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, so that doesn't just mean physically, but mentally as well, you know. But that's why I've kind of doubled down that I like the fact that this podcast plays the last thing before the channel turns off. And it might not be the big, you know, giant audience and all of that stuff, but that's our way of, you know, I don't know, like, yes, you can have a revolution, or you can just become normal over time, and doing that. I guess you asking me that, why did I think we were moving away? Would that not be the way you see it?
No, I was more just trying to understand how you were coming up with that around while we thought, because I guess if I'm being totally honest, I didn't see that, so I was really interested to see what made you say that we were moving away from it.
I mean, lately it's definitely not that, but I thought, because there's two ways I look at it. There's actually what's happening, and then there's a narrative around where we're pushing towards. I thought the worldwide narrative was for kind of more acceptance, but the more you hear about how the world is, and maybe that's the difference, right, is that it's easy to say we're one thing. Maybe it's like a professional sports team. The brand is something different to how people really are, and maybe we're just having a window into how people really are. And I don't really know what to do with that information, but I guess there's no answers needed, right? And that's the hilarious thing, when I watch your interview on breakfast and stuff. You've got 8 minutes to get a case across, and nothing's 8 minutes simple, and also we're kind of starved for conversation, free flow. So when you do get longer than that, we're all like, oh, what are we going to talk about now? But I definitely think us being here and doing this, there's I have to believe that is worth it. I think it's pretty clear that with rocketing suicide rates and kind of people being mega unhappy these days, when they've got that dream of the house, the car, the perfect stuff, that it's not enough. So maybe we'll go to the last break, and when we come back, I'd be keen to talk about how you keep yourself, centered, what techniques you use to help you process the world, particularly. One of the metaphors I like to think about is there's this kind of old, saying or something called St. George the Dragon Slayer, right? And it's like this dragon slayer who's used to fighting dragons, but as the tale goes on, he's seen outside one night in his underwear just swinging a sword around, because there was no more dragons, but he's used to killing dragons. And I want to know how we can be calm when we need to be calm, and how we can rev up when we need to rev up. So wondering if sport offered you a bit of insight into those things and your work that you do today. Do you have rituals you follow, I guess exercise or meditation or those type of things?
Look, I want to be totally honest. Since probably coming out of COVID, I've been pretty slack with my routines, which am going to get back into on Wednesday. Why Wednesday? Well, because I'm probably going to have a late night tonight, which means I'm going to get up late tomorrow. But I do have a routine where I was up between 5:30 and 6 every morning. And look, I'm really flexible, if that makes sense, in sort of what I do. Sometimes I'll listen to the Calm app and try and do a little bit of meditation. And other times I actually need to listen to a bit of R&B or hip-hop. Or I just put on this other app which just plays raining outside. And so I'm that person where, I'm not going to say Monday to Friday, this. It's just, okay, I'm going to wake up at the same time every morning, but what that routine is going to be for that particular morning, I don't know until I wake up and I'll be like, no, I feel like a bit of Bee Gees, or, so, and then that's pretty much sort of how I go about it. And if I feel like training, in that, in the morning, I'll train. If not, I'll train in the afternoon. So, I like just keep it flexible. The reason why is because I do not like, certainty and structure. I get bored too easily. So I love to have that flexibility, and sometimes uncertainty around how it's going to go.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, bro, it totally makes sense. You know why it doesn't make sense is you're probably not used to saying that out loud, because we've all conditioned ourselves to, like, I got a plan and I got a thing. But man, when you talk like that, you know, I just think it's so important, because you're a brave person to actually, not, you know, you are a brave person, but I mean the average person is so brave to go out there and project like they've got all of their stuff together. Like, there is a trade-off of the uncertainty, what I hear from you, for that flexibility, but I think it's the right trade-off, you know. I think that is the trade-off that means we don't need all of the suppressant pills and all of these other things, and I just don't think we're willing collectively to have these kind of confronting deeper conversations, because they can get used against us, right? People can watch it and go like, oh, you're not serious. And it's like, well, no, it's not that. It's just I'm not willing to end up as a pile of whatever, you know, pile of chaos. So, man, I'm probably like, I would like to think I come across as someone like that, but I'm aiming to be more flexible, you know, like I'm still deep in that world of, I'm freaked out about not having that regular pay coming in, you know, but I know it deep within that if I was to let myself sit with that fear, you would ultimately find a way, you know, because you always do. That would be the ultimate motivation. And I guess when you're, because your work does help players, right, with transitioning from footy. Is it? What else do you do, bro? You do like lots of different little business things too, eh?
Yeah. Look, I still do a bit of one-on-one private coaching with clients, and it's very similar to the work that I do with the athletes.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing that I love doing is working with these athletes and players and helping them build and leverage their brand, creating digital assets, products to sell online, and then ultimately make sure that we can start to implement that transition plan, which is so important. And so, you know, it's something I've been doing for 2.5 years, and really just a lot of it has been, I'm not going to lie, Will, a lot of it has been hand-holding and education. Yeah. But I'm pretty confident they've got it now. And so it's, and you know, COVID was a blessing, because now they actually were like, hey, well, there's a reality that we may not never play again. So what have I got? Which for a lot of them, it's always like, well, I need to do something now. So which has been really, really good for us.
No, man, that's wow. You know, we're at an interesting time of history too, right? Because it's not clear how it all plays out. You know, in New Zealand at the moment, I think we've started to see a small amount of COVID come back in, regardless how it's kind of entered back in. It's broken the illusion again that we're safe, and you know, I can't help but think for those people who are already in the space of the unknown, it's not. Yeah, I'd like to think that many of us took the opportunity in COVID to reconnect, you know, and not just wait, because I think waiting would be a mistake, you know, just waiting for it to kind of go away, because it's not, but to sit down and analyze, you know, who we are and what we do, and but I also know that, like, time hasn't gone far enough, so we could just be, you know, dealing with a little bit of anxiety and stress and all of that stuff. Do you get stressed, bro? And I only ask that because I don't want to leave these conversations not knowing how people deal with stuff. Like, it's something that I think about a lot, is that we just put a buzzword to something like mental health or stress or anxiety, but we never actually sit down to say, how do you work through that and all of those things. And I guess I don't want to get kind of too private, but you could, for example, talk about, you know, the footy stuff, and how do you deal with incredible amounts of pressure that are put on you to deliver, right? And I think that's something people in their own capacities, whether it's paying the bills or getting stuff done, or, you know, just start things up. Do you kind of have ways you specifically deal with, I guess, the tougher bits?
Both in terms of sport and business have different pressures, and which means that you have to deal with them differently. So in sport, I didn't have to worry about money, but I had to worry about performance. In business, I have to worry about money, and you know what I mean. And so in sport, I dealt with pressure in a way that probably looking back, I could have done a lot better. I was very emotional in terms of I let a lot of stuff affect me, both personally and professionally in terms of my performance. The media was a big one. My mum used to ring the media and give them a gobful. And so looking back, I definitely could have dealt with that sort of pressure a lot better. And I'm just being honest with you, Will. I don't know what that looks like thinking back, right? But what I've learned now in terms of business is opening up and just sharing. I found really helps. So I speak to my close sort of friends in a circle, and if I'm really feeling stressed, I'll just ring them and I'll just say, man, I flip. This is what's happening, right? This is, I'm feeling like this. And then what they do is they're not just a sounding board, but then they offer practical advice, because when you're in that state, sometimes you need that sounding board to assist you. And that's how I found that I deal with stress in terms of business. And I'm lucky that I have a mentor that we touch base every week, right? Which is awesome, because I know that I can be vulnerable and not be scared of them making fun of me, right? And so, and I love that I'm grateful that I have that relationship. So I think, and you brought it up at the very start, you're your own marketer, producer, and yet are you supposed to be your own counselor? I don't know. Right? So, and I think a lot of solopreneurs tend to think they do. So, but I'm actually really curious to hear what your thoughts are and how you deal with it as someone I know who's been doing this now for quite a number of years, how you've dealt with it.
Yeah, well, I don't know, because I think it's like, it must be something like, because my professional job is I edit, right? So I make little videos for people, and I always think that you never know when I've done my job, because you shouldn't notice it. It should just flow. But whenever there's a bad edit or something, or you can see something wrong, it doesn't fit together, or the words and audio don't, you instantly know, and it gives you a signal that that's not a good thing. And I think about it a little bit like that in terms of stress, that you kind of can't appreciate when you don't have it because you're not supposed to, but the moment you do, what I've come to realize is I'm probably quite good at listening to that stress, to say you have to do something, that something's on your mind, and because I'm probably a natural communicator through my psychology of because we all have these different personality types. I think the psychologist said there's 16 of them, and we're all mixed up into one, and they're not even based off just our ancestry or our experiences. I think about them a little bit like an immune system. Humanity has lots of variations, and that is kind of an awesome tool to keep us alive, because you have to have different personalities for different things, which is why it's so fascinating about sports, because it's like everyone's lumped in together to be this mega thing. But in terms of like stress, I'm probably not that good, actually. Like, I don't really lash out, but I've been trying to really think about stress. Like, one of the things that I can't quite get my head around at the moment is I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder about, even when we call like stress, we don't really know what that means. Or when we say mental health, we don't really know what that means. It's like saying you love someone. You don't actually know what that means. It's just a series of things, So I'm making it an effort to understand those series of things, So if you have a feeling that isn't right, is it just you being lazy, or is it you suppressing something about yourself? And it could be a mixture of those. But for example, meditation, I'm not a fan of that word either, because I think we lose the meaning behind it, which is a focusing of the mind. That's all it is, and blocking everything else out. So I think the conversation should be, here's 10 ways to do that, and go and do that. And one of the ways that works for me is hopping in an ice bath, because what that does for me is it just makes me focus on, man, this sucks. But what I'm realizing is I'm not thinking about everything else, Look, I don't really know if that's what you asked me, but that's kind of what I'm feeling, It's like, it's definitely, we are all of those things that we talked about, you're your marketer, but it's just a tricky one, because I don't know if we're our own kind of physician. Maybe it's like a partnership where you can't hand it over to someone, but you have to be aware that you need help from time to time. And look, I don't think it's on any of us to answer that stuff right now, bro. But even the fact I think that we have that conversation is awesome, because there's plenty of people, watching now, and plenty of people who, the statistics are clear. It seems like we're the unhappiest we've ever been, bro? So I just think it's, that's why I relate it back to what you do. You stood up and you accounted, and maybe if we finish on that, bro, and I said I wasn't really going to talk about it, but we don't have to talk directly, but when you kind of finish posting those videos, what do you think? Were you kind of full of adrenaline, or were you just I feel better now because I don't have to hold this in?
Yes, I was sort of full of adrenaline. But when I post content like that, there's a similar path that happens as soon as I press post. So adrenaline, emotion, and then about 30 minutes in, what the F did I just do? But the one thing that I learned, and this was the one thing that I know, and I did this about 2.5 years ago, and I made a pact that if I post something, I'm not going to take it off.
Whoa.
Right? And so that's what I do. And so whenever I start to feel that fear, I'll remember that pact that I made, because I tell myself as that if I post something, there's a meaning and reason behind it, and I will live and die by whatever consequence comes from that. And so it almost aids in what I do, really, because I'm I know that once I post it, this ain't coming down.
Yeah. That's a freaky idea either way you look at it, right? The fact that you can erase things sucks too, because that gets us into the blocking of things. And I applaud that, and I think many of us watching, it's just you have to be accountable. And what I love is that in true life, not social media life, but in actual life, you can say, oh, guess what? I may not have been right about all these things, and I was just trying to express it. But I just think anyone that is going to tell you anything should have a super hard look at themselves as well, right? Because I don't think it is always about just being right. I think it is about and if anything, the journey that we're all on is most likely we're all wrong in some way, but if you're aware of that, you can learn from it and move on. So but I think in that case you are right, because there's a certain amount of control that I think it isn't appropriate for the amount of openness we have in this world. It may have been when there was, say, 2 TV channels, a couple of newspapers, 1 radio show, but now it's it's your name. And it's they got to get on board and join the ride. I heard a comedian, a bit of a controversial comedian, but he was talking about it's cool for Nike and that to bring out slogans, but they should remember that it was the people that led it first. The people just did it, and then the logo came on top of that. And I can say that because I don't have a big profile and I haven't been attached to a bigger thing, but but even regardless of that, you know, it has to be, bro. It has to be that you're you first, and whatever league stuff is attached to you second. And yeah, I wonder how you would be if you were a player now, right? And you were listening to you talking like that. So yeah. But anyway, let's not get into that, because there's people and they're all doing their stuff. So yeah, bro. All right. Where can people follow you, brother? For, you know, if they want to reach out to you in a business capacity or just follow your journey.
Yeah, I guess I'm on most of the social media platforms. You can just Sione Faumuinā on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Or they can just jump on my website, sionefauminā.co.nz. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Will. Yeah, had a good time, and thanks for having me.